This podcast is brought to you by Most Valuable Podcasts, leading the league in podcasting entertainment.
What's up, Real MVPs, Ricky Widmer here, along with the one, the only, Brandon Swanson.
Hey.
And we are back for another edition of the Primetime Podcast right here on Most Valuable Podcast, where we usually talk about the best in college football and college basketball. Going to be starting soon to kind of have to be able to mix the two, as basketball is just around the corner. However, we are in a full football mode. As Brandon, before I get into the usual way I start this podcast, what about all the upsets and all the crazy games that we had this past week?
It was nuts. Actually, I think that they said if you put down a parlay on a number of underdogs against teams, and I think it was in the Pac-12, if you put down a $100 parlay on like these 5 games on those underdogs, you would have gotten $170,000.
What? $170,000?
Yeah.
Whoa, I gotta start gambling. Maybe that's the way I get out of my debt. I just start gambling on these college football games now that it's actually okay to do so.
Debt, though, Ricky.
Yeah, well, that's
the way you get into debt.
Knowing me, I'd win some, but I would lose quite a bit. But if you haven't noticed, Brandon on the phone again this week, so we're doing a phoner. It's both audio on YouTube and now on all the podcast services we're on around the world. Before we get into what we're going to talk about, I'll do the housekeeping first. Make sure to check out patreon.com/mostvaluablepodcast. That's how you can support us. If you join us at the $10 tier, each and every month you support us at the $10 tier, you can join a podcast. You can come on a Primetime Podcast and talk about whatever you want to talk about. You can do so down below in the description. You can also support us by getting yourself an MVP t-shirt showing off the logo, showing off the brand MVP. You can also get that at mostvaluablepodcast.com, where you can also catch MVP each and every day. And then last but not least, make sure to go on to iTunes and Apple Podcasts. We have not gotten a new rating since October 10th. But please go on to iTunes and Apple Podcasts. Let us know why you like listening to the podcast. Give us whatever rating you think we deserve, but I hope you're giving us a 5-star rating. But Brandon, jam-packed show today. We're going to start with a little college football playoff. We are recording this on the eve of the first rankings for the college football playoff season for 2018. We're going to take a look at 2 specific conferences, the Big 12 and the Pac-12, to see if they are still alive. Then we're going to dive into 2 specific games. We've got Alabama LSU this weekend. Will it be a great game? The LSU Tigers, I think, are a 14.5-point underdog, and they are at home against Alabama. And then we got a big game in the Big 10 where we got Penn State going up against Michigan. Can the Wolverines avoid an upset to the hands of the Penn State Nittany Lions? We will dive into that. And then at the end of the podcast, we will go ahead and make our picks for week number 10 in college football. But the first topic we will get into, college football playoff. The picture is still not yet clear because there's 3 undefeateds at the top who will most likely be in 1, 2, and 3. And then there's a slew of just one-loss teams. And I'm going to throw UCF out there before those fans get mad. You guys are undefeated, but you guys will probably not be in the top 4 of the college football rankings this week. Then there's a slew of one-loss teams. And the 2 I want to look at are Oklahoma and Washington State. Because with Texas losing to West Virginia, or not to West Virginia, they play West Virginia this week, losing to Oklahoma State this past week, Oklahoma now looks like they may be, I know West Virginia's still in there, but we could throw both of them in there, but Oklahoma looks to be right now the favorite to get into the college football playoff from the Big 12. They only have that 1 loss to Texas, and Washington State seems like the only team that might have a little bit of a chance to even crack the playoff from the Pac-12. They have a lone loss to USC earlier in the year when they lost 39-36. I want to just ask you, Brandon, to start everything off. Is looking at everything, and I know it's still early, but each week we get a little bit more answers. Do you think at this point the Big 12 and the Pac-12 are still alive when it comes to the college football playoff?
I think that certainly when you look at both of those, the one that I would say more so has a chance is going to be the Big 12. There's bigger games remaining on the schedules for those teams. For if you're looking at an Oklahoma, they still have to play the West Virginia Mountaineers at the end of the season. West Virginia, they have Texas this weekend, and then of course they have Oklahoma. I think that is why I would look at the Big 12 and say that there's more of an opportunity if you're comparing Big 12 and Pac-12 for the Big 12 to have a chance. While Washington State has looked really good and they have won some big games, especially their last four. They've won 4 in a row, beating Utah, a good team, the best team on the other side, in the Pac-12 South. Then you've got they beat Oregon State, as most teams should. You beat Oregon, and then you win on the road at Stanford by 3 points this past weekend. But for Washington State, the remaining schedule isn't terribly strong, or as strong as the Big 12 schedule. Yeah, they've got Colorado on the road, they've got Arizona, they've got Washington, and now you got a Cal team who just beat Washington. They're beating a Washington team who is not a Washington team we've seen in the past. I mean, Jake Browning, things were so bad he got benched. Then you've got a Colorado team who's been up and down this season, and then you have an Arizona team that's the same way, up and down, but who had a huge week this past weekend against Oregon. Where did that come from? A 44-point explosion against this Oregon team. So Washington State, while I think that they're very much alive because they're 7-1, they've been playing well, and the rest of their schedule doesn't prove to be terribly difficult, that could be one thing that hurts them. The Big 12, they're alive. They have just one loss. You look at Oklahoma and you look at West Virginia, but the rest of their schedule, West Virginia has 2 more ranked games, and then you've got Oklahoma, who has at least 1 ranked game. So that's where I think if you look at the two, you compare them, it's a little bit more in play for the Big 12 than it is for the Pac-12 right now.
Yeah, and I would agree with you. Right now, it looks like the only way, I'll say this, the only way the Pac-12 has a shot at getting into the playoff is if Washington wins its next 4 games and then beats either, right now it would be number 16 Utah, but anything can happen. You've got really every other team after Utah in the south of the Pac-12. They have 3 losses. So really if Utah loses 1 game, everyone then has 3 losses right now in that side of the conference, whereas Washington State, it's probably going to come down to, if they win their next 3, it'll come down to potentially that Washington game to see if they can get into the Pac-12 title game from the north. That's the only way the Pac-12 is getting in, is if Washington State wins their next 4, gets that 5th game, and then wins that 5th game in the Pac-12 title game. With the Big 12, it's a little bit more feasible. Like you had mentioned, you got West Virginia. They have 2 ranked opponents left. However, I will say they do have, and we will be picking this game because West Virginia will probably be ranked at this, but November 17th, they do go into Oklahoma State, so we'll have to see who Brandon picks.
I'll be withholding from that one. I'll be abstaining from that pick.
And then we will see who wins because I can't make a pick unless I know who Brandon thinks is going to win. And like when I look at the standings for the Big 12, really it comes down to like Texas needs a win this week. Them losing to Oklahoma State obviously was not good, but they need a win just because, all right, they've already after this week will have played West Virginia, will have played Oklahoma. Then, like you mentioned, Oklahoma and West Virginia already have played each other. And Oklahoma, they're already behind the 8 ball because they lost to Texas in their rivalry game. And West Virginia is the easiest. They win both of them, and they go ahead and they go on and be the top team in the Big 12. The only question is who's going to be that second team. And I feel like Texas, we're not talking about them. They're kind of behind the 8 ball because they can just win out and be the number 1 seed in the Big 12 still. But Oklahoma, they're that team that although they are 7th in the rankings, to me, they are behind the 8 ball because even if West Virginia beats Texas and then then West Virginia goes on and beats Oklahoma, because Oklahoma lost that Red River rivalry game, they would then be behind Texas and not get that Big 12 title shot. However, you could possibly say, well, Ricky, if they lose to West Virginia, that's where their playoff shot loses. It's there, not the fact that they wouldn't get a Big 10 title game.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that if they lose to West Virginia on November 23rd, that last game of the regular season, I think if they lose to West Virginia there, it's kind of all said and done for them. Mm-hmm. They're just kind of dead in the water at that point. I think, and this is an interesting conversation to talk about, Big 12 and Pac-12. But the bigger thing even from this is, do either of them even have a chance? Because many people would say right now that the fourth team, because I think right now it would be safe to say, as of what we've seen through, 8 weeks, mm-hmm. is going to be the fact that they've got Alabama at 1, Clemson at 2, Notre Dame at 3, and a toss-up at number 4. So right now everyone's fighting for that number 4 spot. Mm-hmm. Everyone's fighting for that number 4 spot right now, and a lot of people would say it's still in the hands of the Big Ten, and it could be. Mm-hmm. It very well could be. Michigan is still very much alive over there. Penn State stayed somewhat alive. Ohio State was on a bye this week, but they're still alive, and they still have a big matchup with Michigan. Michigan plays Penn State this weekend. That's going to be a really big game for Michigan. If Penn State loses, they're completely done. If Michigan loses, they're in a worse spot, and then it really comes down to that last game against Ohio State. Mm-hmm. But that's where I think a lot of people still believe that it's alive in the hands of the Big Ten for that final spot as we look at the playoff scenario right now.
Well, and I'm about to either make you angry, but also I'm going to throw this out there because it may very well happen. In the SEC and the Big Ten, there are a slew of one-loss teams. We got LSU with 1 loss, Georgia with 1 loss, Kentucky with 1 loss, and then all the Big Ten teams you mentioned, Michigan and Ohio State. But then there's also like Florida and Penn State who have the 2 losses. If you look at this weekend, Alabama plays LSU. Let's say the favorite wins. Alabama wins. LSU is now at 2 losses. Let's say Kentucky, Georgia, pick a winner in that one. Doesn't matter. The other one lost. Okay, that's another team at 2 losses. Then Penn State, if they're able to beat Michigan, Michigan is now at 2 losses with Penn State, who's also at 2 losses. Then later on in the year, SEC title game. Let's say Alabama rolls on through, no pun intended, and they beat the winner of this Georgia-Kentucky game. All right, that Georgia-Kentucky game, that team now has 2 losses. And then if Michigan beats Ohio State, I know there's a lot of ifs here, but just roll with me. Michigan then beats Ohio State. That is another team with 2 losses. And then it comes down to what is going on in the Big 12, what is going on in the Pac-12, but then also I'm going to say it. I know a lot of this needs to happen, a lot of what ifs, but if these teams moving forward just beat each other up, like a Penn State beats Michigan up this week and wins, but then Michigan goes ahead and beats Ohio State, if we get a ton of 2-loss teams, that could then open the door for a West Virginia, for an Oklahoma, for a Washington State, who might not have the rest of the schedule be the toughest, but they would only have 1 loss. They would have that conference championship. And also, you could throw in there, because they are high enough in the rankings this year, if enough of these 1-loss teams get knocked down into 2 losses, that might even open the door for a UCF to be in the playoff discussion at the end of the year?
It possibly could. That's where these next couple of games are going to really start to clear up the picture that we're looking at here for the playoffs. It'll get really crazy if an Alabama, a Clemson, or a Notre Dame are to lose, because then we're looking at, okay, well, especially Notre Dame. If Notre Dame loses one game, things get very difficult for them. But they've been taking care of business and doing it pretty well lately. So that's good, certainly on their end. But if an Alabama falls over there in the SEC, that makes things really interesting. And LSU were to win. But the way that things are, and the way that we can believe that Alabama most likely wins out, Clemson most likely wins out, Notre Dame most likely same thing as of right now. But it's that fourth team. It is that fourth team. And right now, I don't necessarily see it happening. But if all these teams are beating up on each other, and you come up with a number of 2-loss teams, and you still have UCF sitting there at a perfect record, when do you say, okay, well, we have to at least put them into the discussion. We have to at least put them into the discussion to, go through and, okay, look back at their schedule, look at, all of those types of things. But that's where they could be heard. That's where they could be heard of. And we've said it time and time again of, did they have a strong enough schedule? And then people who are UCF fans certainly will say, well, did, teams like, people have used Alabama. Alabama's a bad scenario for this one because if they win out, they're certainly going to be in. People will say, well, yeah, Alabama has a tough schedule, but look at some of the cupcake games that they put in there against the Citadel or, whatever have you. And that's an easy game. That's an easy game. That's an easier game than the teams that UCF is playing every single week. And Alabama fits about 3 of those in on their schedule. So then UCF fans would say, well, how is that fair? We're at least playing a balanced schedule of maybe not the toughest teams, but we aren't going all the way down to the Citadel, of that level to play them. So that's where, there's the argument that you can make for both sides there. But it really, to me, it's going to be right now the one that I'm interested in that Big Ten and what they do and what happens in this game for Michigan this weekend. Because if Michigan loses to Penn State, that puts Penn State at 4-2 in the conference. Michigan at a 5-1. Ohio State most likely would get a win this weekend, and that would put them to 5-1 because they're playing Nebraska. If they lost there, I would be. They should probably just fire, their head coach Urban Meyer at that point. But I don't see that happening. But then that puts Michigan at 5-1 and Ohio State at 5-1, and both of those teams really battling for that final game. In that final game of 2 5-1 teams, one of them would most likely be not 6-1, but have only one loss at the very end there. So that could be the thing that helps them the most. And then Ohio State, if they were to win, they have just a one loss overall with everything. And Michigan would have, a loss and, possibly 2, and then 2 losses overall. So that's where I think Ohio State is still very much alive in this thing for the Big Ten.
And it's going to be, of course, for the 2 conferences, it's going to clear up because, like, for example, this weekend, Georgia and Kentucky are playing each other. Michigan and Penn State are playing each other. One of those teams has to win. One of those teams has to lose unless they tie. But in college football, you don't have the tie. You play the overtime until you get a win. It's not like the NFL. We're up. Overtime's over. You went ahead and tied the game. Last thing I want to ask you before we move on into the 2 games we're going to talk about. So we're recording this on Monday night. Tomorrow will be the first college football playoff rankings that we get for this season. it's pretty sure that Alabama, Clemson, and Notre Dame, in some order, will be the top 3 teams. Brandon, I will ask you first, just to end the segment. If you were the committee, the Brandon Swanson committee, what is your top 4 and then your first 2 out? So your top 6 teams in your playoff rankings this week.
So if it were me, the 4 playoff teams would be Alabama at 1, Clemson at 2, Notre Dame at 3, and then at number 4 I'd have the Michigan Wolverines as of how we stand with things right now. And then my first 2 teams out would probably be Oklahoma and Washington State.
You actually shocked me with that Michigan one because I thought I was going to be bold. So here's what I'm thinking. First off, when I look at the top 3 and I look at all the undefeateds, the only ranked team Alabama has played is Texas A&M. The only ranked opponent that Clemson has beaten is NC State. The only ranked opponents then Notre Dame has beaten, Michigan to start the year, Stanford, and Virginia Tech. I know that Virginia Tech was 24, and they didn't have their starting quarterback. I am going to be bold here, and this is how the first ones should be. My top 4 is going to be Notre Dame at number 1. The reason being, they have played more ranked opponents, and they have beaten those ranked opponents. Then at number 2, Alabama, because they've just cruised this year. And at number 3, Clemson, because they have also cruised this year, except for that game against Syracuse. Then at number 4, my decision for 4 was either LSU or Michigan. And this is why I'm going to choose Michigan, because their only loss came against Notre Dame, who is now, to me, in mine, the number 1 team in my playoff rankings. And their ranked wins are against Wisconsin, who I know now is unranked, and Michigan State. LSU, yes, they had beaten the number 2 team in Georgia. Yes, they've beaten Mississippi State. But Auburn, who they beat by 1, isn't the Auburn we thought. They're not even ranked. Miami isn't the team that we thought they were going to be when they were ranked 8th to start the year. So those opponents have kind of become lesser than what they thought we would be. That's why I would go Michigan at 4. So my playoff matchups would be Notre Dame, Michigan again, and then Alabama, Clemson. And then my first 2 out right now, I think it would have to be LSU and Georgia because of just how close we are to that Ohio State loss. So I'm going to shake things up a little bit with Notre Dame at 1, but also LSU and Georgia being the 5 and the 6 teams of first out. Before we move on, do you have any reaction to either my top 4 or anything that we did not mention in this discussion?
I think that your top 4, it's interesting with having Notre Dame there at number 1. It certainly makes sense, but what I always think is I think a lot of the times the committee they do not go too far. They do not stray too far from the path that the AP top 25 poll kind of has there for them. Mm-hmm. Most likely a lot of the time you're going to have, if, these top 4 teams are, AP top 4 teams, a lot of the time you're getting at least 3 of those teams that are going to be or start as playoff teams. Mm-hmm. I think that I just don't see them moving anything with those top 3, with Alabama, Clemson, and then Notre Dame. I just don't see them moving them, even with Notre Dame possibly having, better wins against opponents. I think they're going to keep it the way it is, and I think they'll also say that it's the way that Clemson beats opponents. It's the way that Alabama has beat opponents, where the teams just aren't even in the games. I mean, this is outside of conference play, inside conference play. They just most of the games aren't very close. They're blowing out teams. Things are done pretty much in the first half. It's over, and a lot of times by the first quarter. So that's why I don't think that they'll stray much from those first three teams, with that fourth one always kind of being that toss-up, especially at the beginning. And then once we have these next couple of weeks that we play, things will become a little bit more clear. So that's why I think it's interesting that you have Notre Dame there at number one, and maybe that is the right move to do if you want to get a legitimate, who has been the best team in terms of how you started the season, the teams that you've played, the way that you've beaten them, the strength of your schedule, this, that, and the other thing. And those are all the things that, the committee is always supposed to take in mind. But, I think that they're not going to go too far from, okay, these are the best. These have been the best teams all year. We're not going to change them from the ladder that they're on right now.
Well, and I thought about today before the podcast, this was early in the morning when I was taking my shower, that, hey, you know what? We haven't talked about Alabama much this year, and it's kind of the same thing that we talk about on the NBA side of the things in the fast break, is that once a team hits greatness like Alabama has, it's just not fun to talk about. And it's like, that's why you get the stuff with Alabama and Nick Saban being mad that fans aren't coming to the game. It's just, when the team's this good, it's like, all right, we know they're going to roll, and there's no conversation there. So that's why the committee will probably do what you said and just keep it in order. But yet again, I find it interesting that it's like, hey, you know what? Notre Dame, they're going out there and playing more ranked opponents than the other two. But we're going to get into Alabama LSU next. Before we do, this is where you guys come in. Let us know what you think down below in the comment section. What would be your playoff rankings? If you're listening to this after Tuesday, what do you think of the playoff rankings? And also, what do you think for the Big 12 and the Pac-12? Are they still alive when it comes to the college football playoff? But Brandon, let's move on into our next topic. And what we're looking at is the first of the two games we are looking at this week in depth. SEC action, Alabama, LSU. We kind of mentioned it last week that, hey, we're going to talk about this one this week after looking at Florida and Georgia just a week ago. We also have Georgia, Kentucky, but really out of the two, this is the bigger game, the Crimson Tide going up against the LSU Tigers. The funniest thing to me, and it's not funny because it shouldn't be true, because it probably should be true with how good Alabama has been this year, but the Crimson Tide will be on the road this week in LSU at Death Valley, and they are a 14.5-point favorite to beat the Tigers. So the thing I want to ask you is, can the Tigers stop the rolling Tide?
Well, it's really funny because LSU hasn't been this big of a home underdog since 1997. Actually, in 1997, they were a 16.5-point home underdog against top-ranked Florida, and that was on October 11, 1997, and LSU upset the Gators 28-21, and they're looking to do the exact same thing here against Alabama. And Alabama actually has been favored in 115 of their past 116 games. So, Ricky, those are some wonderful stats to be able to throw out there. But my answer to you, clear and simple, is no. No, they're not going to be able to do that. They're not going to be able to stop Alabama, because Alabama, to this point, Tua Tagovailoa has not thrown an interception. He has over 2,000 yards. He has 25 touchdowns. He has not turned the football over. Ricky, this guy does not make mistakes. He does not make mistakes. He is very good. He is smart. He knows where to go with the football. He has a great arm. He's accurate. He can get it down the field to those deep threat receivers. That's the biggest thing for LSU. And now they have some good guys in the secondary. Greedy Williams is going to certainly make his presence known for LSU this week, or certainly will try. But when you have to try and cover Jalen Waddle, Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs III, all these guys, deep threats for Alabama, and then don't forget about their plethora of running backs, with the running back core led by Damian Harris. They've got Najee Harris. They've got Josh Jacobs. a lot to process if you're LSU's defense. And on the flip side of things, I think Alabama's defense is going to make it very, very difficult for Josh Burrow.
Yeah, and for me, the thing that I'm thinking about is the one thing that LSU and LSU fans can kind of stick in their cap this week is that if you look at the games for Alabama this year, and I'm not saying like this point that I'm going to make, I know someone's going to come out and say, yeah, but Ricky, they've been in tough games before. Look at last year, look at the national championship. But just hear me out here with this. The one thing that LSU has that they can hang on to in this game and could make it interesting is Louisville, I almost said Louisiana, Louisville, Arkansas State, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, Louisiana, Arkansas, Missouri, Tennessee. The only ranked opponent that Alabama has played was Texas A&M, and that was a home game. Alabama has not been in a pressure game this year. Their backs have never been pinned against the wall, and a lot of that is Tua not throwing an interception. You are absolutely right. But this team has just been dominant this year. And I know you could say, well, Ricky, look at the opponents they've played. Louisville's dog poo this year. Missouri, yeah, I know they beat Kentucky, but Alabama's nowhere near the level of Kentucky. They are above Kentucky. Tennessee is not at the level of Alabama. Arkansas is not a good team. Ole Miss, although they played well in a few games, are not at Alabama's level. Texas A&M, I thought that they might be able to upset Alabama just because of Jimbo Fisher, but Alabama came to play there, and of course that was a home game. LSU, the one thing that they can use as ammo is that if this turns into a close game, how is Alabama going to react in this one? I know that people are going to say, well, you don't have to worry about Tua. He came in the Georgia Bulldog championship game and won the game. But also I would say there might have been a little pressure on him, but he wasn't the one playing in the game beforehand. So it's a little bit different when it's like, oh, no, I'm playing and we are losing, than to, hey, I'm coming in for so-and-so because he started the game and I'm coming in for relief. Whereas you look at LSU, they have had some dogfights this year. A 1-point win over Auburn. They've also had the Georgia game where they played the number 2 team. That's a prime example of, hey, you come to our house, we are going to upset you. Then they have a close game this past week at home against Mississippi State. And, of course, they played a close game against Florida before Florida pulled out to win 27-19. This LSU team has been in more close games than Alabama. So I wonder if this becomes a dogfight, if this one gets close, I wonder if LSU is going to be able to lean on that more so than Alabama, because Alabama just hasn't seen that this year.
But how many times have we talked about this in years past, where we've been at this type of situation, where we've talked about an Alabama-LSU matchup, this is going to be good, and then Alabama's won the last 7. And that's where we're at. And it's, again, maybe LSU is able to do enough to slow Alabama's high-powered offense a little bit. Maybe they're able to do enough. But I don't think that LSU's offense is going to be able to have enough. Alabama's defense is for real. Their front line is for real. Their secondary has done some outstanding things this season as well. In the 2 games that Alabama has played that I look at the opposing offenses as being pretty good, Texas A&M and Kellen Mond, and then Missouri and Drew Lock. So both of those quarterbacks, very good, can definitely get the ball down the field. Kellen Mond, they held him under 200 yards passing. They turned him over twice. Drew Lock, they held him under 200 yards passing. They turned him over twice. Both of those quarterbacks, I think, are better than Joe Burrow. What's this Alabama defense going to do to poor Joe Burrow this weekend? That's what I wonder. There's going to be so much pressure on Burrow. I don't think he's going to have a lot of time to get the ball off. He may have enough time to hand it off, and that's what they're going to have to hope for, because teams in the past, to be able to beat Alabama in the past, they've had to have a good running game or a better running game, because when you looked at Alabama's defense a number of times in some of the bigger games, you worried, okay, are they going to be able to stop the run? Are they going to be able to stop the run? Well, Alabama's pretty much stopped everyone this season, just their offense. I mean, it didn't matter if it was the run or the pass, they just stopped the offense. And if they are able to do that again this weekend, I don't think LSU is going to be in the game for too long.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing I look to is, first off with LSU, I'll bring that up because you mentioned it. Yeah, Burrow is going to be a big part of this. Mainly to me, don't make mistakes, take care of the football. But the ones that I am really looking at is Nick Brossette and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And the reason why I'm looking at those two is because of what Alabama, if you look at the last two times, well, the last time Alabama lost a game and then the last time they were in a pressure cooker kind of a game and had their backs pressed against the wall, the first one I'll go with is the loss. The last time they lost, last year, the Iron Bowl game right before the conference championship and the playoffs officially started. And in that game, yes, Jalen Hurts didn't throw a pick, but you look at the running backs. Jalen Hurts, the quarterback, had the most rushing yards at 82. The running backs, the two-headed monster of Damian Harris and Bo Scarborough, only ran the ball 6 times apiece, 51 and 46 each, one lone touchdown to Bo Scarborough. Whereas you look at the other side, Jarrett Stidham, the quarterback, had 51, but Kerryon Johnson in that game, 104 yards and a touchdown. And then Stidham had a rushing touchdown as well, and Kerryon Johnson had a passing touchdown. Then you look at the national championship game. That Georgia defense, Najee Harris, 64 yards, 6 rushing attempts. Jalen Hurts, 47 yards on 6 attempts. I know Tua had in there and had 27, but Bo Scarborough, 23 on 4 attempts. Damian Harris, 17 yards on 6 attempts. Or if you look at Georgia in that game, Sony Michel had 98 yards in that game on 14. Nick Chubb didn't look that well in that one. He was struggling, but Sony Michel was the one that was carrying him in that, even when Jake Fromm finished with 1 touchdown to 2 INTs. So for LSU, the thing that I look to is on the defense, they've got to stand strong against that run game. I know that Alabama has Tua now, so I mean, yes, it's good that you have Greedy on the outside, but how do you pressure Tua? It's not just getting to the pass, like getting your pass rushers to the quarterback. It is also looking at it and saying, we have to stop this run game. If we can limit this Alabama run game or make them one-dimensional to where they're only rushing the ball 6 times with their running back in the game. If both running backs for Alabama only have 6 carries apiece, the LSU defense can say, we did our job. On the other side of the ball, it's Joe Burrow is not going to be that quarterback that is going to go out there, Tom Brady, I'll say he's not going to Aaron Rodgers it. He's not going to win you the game. LSU fans are going to take that the wrong way, but he's not going to Aaron Rodgers you a game. That's why Nick Brossette and Clyde Edwards-Helaire need to be strong and provide support in the rushing attack on offense. So if LSU has a good run game, the defense stays strong against the run game, LSU could be in this one and could upset the Crimson Tide.
What they're going to have to try and do is try and remake the game plan from the Georgia game.
Mm-hmm.
They were able to win that Georgia game because they ran the ball down Georgia's throat. That's what they were able to do. They had Clyde Edwards-Helaire with over 140 yards. They had Joe Burrow getting into the action. They had Nick Brossette getting into the action. They're going to have to try and do that this week against Alabama. What they also were able to do is they were able to get to the quarterback and sack him 4 times, and they were able to sack Jake Fromm 4 times. I couldn't remember his name for a quick second. I forget him sometimes because he started to fall off the face of the earth until this past week.
I mean, he's back.
But I think that that's what LSU needs to be able to try and do, is go back and see how they were able to win that game, because the Georgia Bulldogs, will have similarities to what Alabama was, because having Kirby coming under the Alabama regime, the Nick Saban regime, and being over there for a long time. I mean, you can see the similarities. He tries to make his defense off of Alabama's and stuff like that. I mean, there are similarities there. So if LSU was able to beat, like the Alabama, maybe 2.0, I mean, that's not even, probably very accurate, but it's because Alabama is so much, I think, at a higher level. That's what LSU is going to need to do. They're going to have to try and put a game plan together, which they will, that they think is going to be the best to try and stop this offense. But again, while you do that, and while you might be able to slow the offense, I look at it from the other end on the defensive side for Alabama, of them being able to bring so much pressure on Burrow, and he's not going to have the time to throw, like I had mentioned before. I think that that's where they may fall into being just one-dimensional in the running game, and if that's the case, then Alabama can stack the box, and that will make it difficult for them to be able to be effective there. So this is a game where LSU also, they want to be able to start fast. If they win the toss, they want the ball first. They want to try and be able to get on the board, get a score early, because that's why Alabama is no other teams are not in the game. Alabama is blowing them out by quarter one. By the end of the first quarter, Alabama has blown out teams. What LSU needs to be able to do is they need to try and start fast and get a score early and hold Alabama down early. If they can either get a turnover on downs, a couple of 3-and-outs against Alabama early, LSU will feel really good about themselves. But if Alabama comes out, scores on their first 2-3 possessions, I think that's going to show us the type of game that we're going to get.
Well, and just the last thing that I was going to bring up is you mentioned they have to go back and kind of see what Georgia did. I would also go and say, hey, in our last 3 games, look at how the games have turned out and how we've played. In the Florida and Mississippi State game, very similar. The Florida game you lost, your running back, Nick Brosette played well, 95 yards, and Edwards-Helaire played decent with 55. Brosette also had 2 tutties in that game, but Joe Burrow had 2 INTs in that one, whereas you let LaMichael Pirine run for 85 yards and 2 touchdowns as well. Felipe Frank, 1 touchdown, 1 INT. Yeah, it was close, but that's why you ended up losing. Then the Mississippi State one, you were able to pull off that win because Brosette got into the end zone and because your defense picked off Nick Fitzgerald 4 times, but Fitzgerald, 131 yards on the ground, and Joe Burrow, 1 interception, no touchdowns. That's why that one was only a 19-3 game. But then you look at the Georgia game, where they won 36-16. Jake Fromm, 1 touchdown, 2 INTs. DeAndre Swift, 72 yards on 12 carries. Elijah Holyfield, 56 yards on 7 carries. That's what you need. You need to limit the running backs. Then on the offensive side, Edwards-Helaire, amazing game, 145 yards on that one. You had Joe Burrow running in for 2 touchdowns. Nick Brosette running in for a touchdown. And Joe Burrow didn't throw a single pick in that game. So I would say my 3 keys, and I think we've hit them at nauseum in this 16, 18-minute topic. The first one is turnovers, duh. The second one is limit Alabama's run game. And then number 3 is you got to have a rushing attack of your own and establish the run on your side of the ball, because if you don't do that, you're going to lose. Those would be the 3 things that if LSU does each one of those things, they will be in this game and have a chance to upset the Tide at the end of it when it's all said and done.
I think we're going to see a good game this weekend. I'm excited to watch.
Well, this is where you guys come in. Let us know what you guys think down below in the comment section. LSU fans, how are you feeling? Alabama fans, what are you guys feeling? We don't hear enough from Alabama fans. Maybe it's because you guys are good and you guys feel like you're going to win every single game that you are in. But let us know what you guys think down below in that comment section. But Brandon, let's move on into the next game that we are kind of taking an in-depth look into, and it is Big Ten action as we have the Penn State Nittany Lions, number 14, 6-2, 3-2 in the conference, going up against Michigan, who is 7-1 overall, 5-0 in the Big Ten. This game will be taking place in Ann Arbor. So I will ask you to start very simple. Can the Wolverines avoid an upset at the hands of the Nittany Lions in Ann Arbor?
They might be able to, Ricky. They might be able to, but this is going to be one of those games where I think we're going to see, it's going to be a game like we've seen Penn State and Ohio State. It's going to be a game like we've seen Michigan and Ohio State. I think we're going to get that same type of energy in this game. It's going to be, I don't want to say whether it's going to be high scoring or low scoring. That I really don't know, but I know it will be close throughout. There will be big plays. We'll see big plays. I think it will come down to the end. What we saw this past weekend from the Penn State and Iowa game, I could very much see us seeing this weekend in Michigan. One thing that's kind of rolling in favor of Penn State right now is they actually have been playing pretty well on the road. In their road games, they beat Pitt 51-6. They beat Illinois 63-24. They beat Indiana 33-28. They've actually played much better on the road than they have at home. Home game, that's where 2 losses came.
Let me throw this out there, though. Is that because of them playing on the road or the quality of opponents they've played on the road?
Well, it just so happens that the quality opponents that they played on the road hasn't been that great, but they actually have looked much better on the road than they have at home, and that's just how it looks. But they were able to seal at Penn State was this past weekend with an interception late in the fourth quarter. So they were able to do that, but Trace McSorley only completed 11 passes, threw an interception. They are a team right now that is a bit shaky. Since that Ohio State game where they really had a chance to win, they didn't. They lost a heartbreaker at home against Michigan State. Then they finally got healthy on the road at Indiana, and then they win coming back home. A tough game, that is, against Iowa. But this is going to be a game where they are going to have to try and run the football, I think. But Michigan has been really good against the run, allowing less than 100 yards per game on the ground this season. I think that this is going to be a tough game for Miles Sanders, but they are going to have to try and use him. They're going to have to try and set that up. Michigan's defense has been stingy really all season long. They're allowing less than 150 yards passing as well. This is a good Michigan defense because it's a Harbaugh defense. But Michigan right now, things seem to be possibly in their favor, but they might be playing without Rashawn Gary, who missed all of October. And Harbaugh's saying that he doesn't know if Gary's going to be able to make it for this contest. So if they do not have defensive lineman Rashawn Gary, that could hurt them. I mean, they've been playing without him, in October, but certainly a guy they want to have in there.
Well, and I know that the thing I am going to throw out there about Gary is that there was an article that I saw earlier today that teammates do not believe the rumors that Gary is kind of keeping himself out in order to kind of play his draft stock a little bit. They're not buying that one bit. But the thing with Michigan that I have a huge question about is if you pull up their last 4 games, I'll say. Their last 4 games. Brandon, do you know the score for Michigan, opponents to themselves, in the first quarter if you combine their last 4 games? Do you know that off the top of your head?
Off the top of my head, no.
All right. I'm going to tell you because I have it pulled up because that's what I was looking at. They have, in the first quarter of their last 4 games, been outscored by opponents 17-3. That is a problem. And the thing is, I'm going to take this with, I told you what looks like bad, but kind of, yes, it's bad, but look at this. We're out of the last 4, you got 2 road games against Michigan State and Northwestern, 2 home games. In those home games, they beat the Badgers 38-13. They beat Maryland 42-21. So they ended up winning those. However, the first quarter against Maryland, they were losing 7-3. Then Michigan went on a tear, scoring 2 touchdowns in the second quarter, scoring 10 points in the third quarter. We're up 27-7 going into the fourth before Maryland started to score some points. With Wisconsin, neither team scored in the first quarter. It was 0-0 after 1. Then Michigan won the second quarter 13-7 and then blew the door open in the fourth quarter. I mentioned the home games first because that's where they're playing. They're playing in Ann Arbor. But yet again, you look at the game that they barely won against Northwestern on the road. Northwestern in the first quarter went up 10-0. They were up 17-0 before Michigan made it 17-7 going into half. And then after halftime, Michigan made the adjustment. Michigan State, it was a similar thing. 7-0 going into halftime with a score of 0-0 after the first quarter. After halftime, Michigan State scored to tie it up. Michigan scored 2 touchdowns in the third and the fourth to win the game. So, I mean, with Michigan, the 2 things that I look at is, yes, this team has been better after half. Harbaugh teams making the adjustments that they need to at halftime. But I think a big one in this game is going to be, how do they play in that first quarter? And if they get jumped on by Penn State like they were by Northwestern, are they going to be able to dig themselves out of a hole because they couldn't score or didn't score in the first?
And hopefully it doesn't come down to that, because where Michigan's been really good this year, certainly for the last 5 games, is running the football with Karan Higdon. Mm-hmm. He's had over 100 yards in his last 5 games, and he's been a big reason for their success. Shea Patterson's been good, not great, really at any point during this season, but Karan Higdon has been great at a number of points during the season. And again, having over 100 yards in the last 5 games has been solid for this Michigan team and has been a big reason why they've been winning. And then you look on the other side for Penn State, they're giving up 161 rushing yards per game. That's just something that it goes right along with how well Higdon's played. If he's able to even have something like that, he'll win. I mean, they'll win. Michigan will. So if they're going to give up Penn State over 100 yards, 120 yards on the ground, as long as Shea Patterson isn't turning the football over, I think that Michigan would be able to pull out a win here. Now, Trace McSorley, he's going to have to be at his best. He is going to have to be at his best. He cannot turn the football over. If Michigan wins the turnover margin, they will win this game. Plain and simple. That is something that Michigan, they have the advantage when they get the turnovers. And if they're able to do that, they will certainly have the upper hand. That's why McSorley has to bring his A game. He has to be the McSorley that we saw numerous times last season with Saquon Barkley there in his final year with Penn State. We need to see McSorley step up and be the leader for this team that we know that he is. And if he does that, then I think Penn State certainly is in the game, certainly has a chance to win this ball game.
So you want to know something funny? You know how I brought up the first quarter totals for Michigan?
Yes.
So I'm making a prediction right here on the podcast. You ready for this? It's going to be 0-0 after one. After the first quarter, it's going to be 0-0. The reason why I say that, here are the last 4 games for Penn State and their first quarters. You ready for this? Against Iowa, 12-7, they trailed. Against Indiana, 14-7, they trailed. Against Michigan State, 7-0, they led. And against Ohio State, 3-0, they led. So you look at it, they've been lately, the last 2 per se, the last 2, they've been outscored in the first half, but yet again came back to win. But then when they played the 2 tougher teams in the conference, they actually led in the first quarter. So some may say, Ricky, you might want to predict like a 3-0, 7-0 Penn State after one. No, I think this one, because of how slow Michigan is, this will be 0-0 after the first quarter. Because now looking at it, I don't think either of these teams start off hot. So it might be key on one side, hey, you got to start hot. The key on the other side is the same thing. So whoever starts off hot in this one might be able to have a leg up on everything. Well, I know you're going to say, duh, whoever does score first is usually going to be at an advantage. But because of how the other team is, whoever can put up more first quarter points might be able to put up enough of a cushion so the other team can't come back and beat them later in the game.
Yeah, again, it's who's going to start off fast in this one. But it could be funny, both these teams, Penn State and Michigan, are putting up 41 and 36 points respectively. This could end up being a 14-7 final score.
Yeah.
I mean, this could end up being a 14-7 final score because of the defenses, because of what could happen in this game, because of just the way that these 2 teams could play each other. We could see a really low-scoring affair in this one. And, of course, now that I said that, it'll be 38-27. But this is a game that Michigan, if they win this, they start maybe to put a little bit of a stranglehold on the Big Ten East. A little bit with looking forward then, and that's what Michigan cannot do, is they cannot be looking forward before this game is over, or even before this game, to the Ohio State game to end the season. But Michigan, if they do get the win against Penn State, they would be 6-0 in the conference and really in controlling their own destiny. And if they were to beat Ohio State, they would win their side of the conference. They would be in the Big Ten title game.
Well, what's really funny, too, is I don't see this happening, but it could happen, so I'll throw it out there anyways. If Michigan wins this game, they'll stay undefeated. If in, I think it's 2 weeks' time, not this game, but the next game, if Ohio State loses to Michigan State, that means that the Wolverines would for sure, yes, they'd have to beat, I think it's Rutgers in their next one, but they would have to then only win one game and would outright win the Big Ten East. It wouldn't happen. It wouldn't matter what would happen in the last 2 when it comes to the Big Ten title, because as long as the Buckeyes have 2, then Michigan can win the 2 before that going into the Ohio State game, and it wouldn't matter what Ohio State did because Rutgers and Indiana are in between. I personally could see Michigan winning both of them, and then that would mean Michigan would be 2 games up on Ohio State with 1 game left if Ohio State gets upset by Michigan State.
Yeah, we're seeing what could be some interesting games coming up. Of course, we'll see that in the next couple of weeks. But but Michigan, that's why this game is so important for them. Even if Penn State were to win, they wouldn't really be, for the most part, wouldn't be doing too much for themselves because they would be 4-2. That would put Michigan at 5-1, and then Ohio State most likely at 5-1. Michigan State would be 3-3. So Penn State would still be well behind. It doesn't do so much for them other than to possibly play a spoiler and throw a monkey wrench into things for the town.
Well, I mean, I was going to ask you this question, but after hearing you talk, it's kind of moot, I think, in my mind, because it's weird that they're 6-2, 3-2. They're the 14th ranked team, and they wouldn't get a title shot. Could we possibly see? I'm going to throw this out there. It depends on how the playoff situations look, but could we get, if Penn State wins this game, could we possibly then be leading up to a situation where Penn State could do to Ohio State exactly what Ohio State did to them? Where Penn State, yeah, we're a 2-loss team, but we're going to get into the playoff, and Ohio State is not, even though Ohio State would have a Big Ten championship to their record. Let's say both of them have 2 losses to their name at the end of the year. Could you see that possibly happening if a 2-loss team got into the playoff?
Well, I guess I don't see it happening because Michigan would then have to, completely combust at the top.
True.
And Ohio State would have to put themselves in the right position. They'd have to beat Michigan. It would. So you know what I'm saying? I don't see it.
Let me paint this out.
Penn State is too far away, Ricky. They're too far away. They're not going to have a chance. If they're at 14, their best bet is to maybe get to 9 and possibly 8. They're not going to get into the top 4 for the playoff. I just don't see it happening. That's the best scenario. It's possibly 8.
Let's paint this out then, and this is the last thing I'll ask before we go on into our picks. Let's say Penn State and Ohio State beat Michigan, so Michigan has 2 losses. They have 2 losses in the conference, 3 overall. Ohio State loses to Michigan State, so they now have 2 losses in the conference. Penn State obviously has 2 losses as well. How interesting would that be for the Big Ten? The Big Ten probably wouldn't get into the playoff, but could you see something where, because it also, I'm not even going to ask the question, because it also matters what goes on in the SEC, because we could have numerous 2-loss teams over there. I am interested just to see this year is if that 4th team, if it'll be at the end of the year, hey, do we put in a 2-loss Power 5 or do we put in an undefeated UCF? Like, that is what I feel like I kind of want to see, just to see what the committee would do. But this could either be really good for the Big Ten, or these next games could be absolute chaos for the Big Ten and could hurt their playoff chances of getting a team into the playoffs. Any final things you want to bring up before we go and make our picks?
No, let's make them.
Well, this is where you guys come in. Let's see what you say down below in the comment section. What do you think about this game, about Michigan, Penn State, the playoffs, anything that we talked about in this segment down below in that comment section. But Brandon, let's close out the podcast doing what we do each and every week, and that is making our picks in college football. How we do it, if you are new to the channel, new to the podcast, we go through all the top 25 games this week. We pick a winner. They are straight pick'ems for this year. If you guys want us to do ATS, you want us to do against the spread, let us know. We will do that next year. But for this year, they are straight pick'em games. We go through all the top 25s, and at the very end, I give a non-top 25 game to pick. Brandon gives a non-top 25 game to pick. It is our non-top 25 games of the week to pick and get a extra win on there that would not be. But Brandon, we're going to start off with a Thursday night matchup, a team that we did not pick about a week or 2 ago, and they proved us both wrong against Cincinnati. We have 5-3 Temple, 4-0 in the American. They are taking on 7-0 UCF, number 9 in the country. They are undefeated, obviously, in the conference as well. Who are you going with, Temple or the 11-point favorited Knights?
Got to go with UCF. They're kind of that team where they haven't lost yet. You don't stop picking against them until they do lose. I don't see them losing this week.
So you can say you give them the Alabama treatment.
A little bit.
You give them the Alabama. I'm giving them the Alabama treatment as well. I'm going to go ahead and pick UCF to get this W. Temple did spur me once when I picked Cincinnati, but I like UCF too much, and plus I kind of want to root for them to possibly make the playoffs. And how do you do that if you're UCF? You win every single game, so that's why I'm going to pick them. Then a Friday night matchup for college football. 4-4 Pitt taking on 6-2 Virginia. Who are you going with in Charlottesville, Pittsburgh or Virginia?
I'm going to have to go with Virginia at home. I think that they've been rolling as of late. They've won their last 3 games. However, if this is a shootout type of game, Pittsburgh has shown that they're built to be able to be in those games. Virginia, maybe not as much, but I am going to go with the Cavaliers.
Now, I am going to go with Virginia as well. This is one that I kind of was like, hey, I want to pick someone. I want to pick Pitt because I think they can upset, because I'm like, I'm going to pick Virginia, and knowing me, I'll pick Virginia, and then Pitt will upset them. But I'm going to pick the Cavaliers to get the win in this one. Then to me, this is an interesting one because I know who I'm going to pick. Who are you going to pick? Undefeated, number 3 team in the country right now, Notre Dame? Or are you picking the 5-3 Northwestern Wildcats?
So this is an interesting game. Northwestern has played very well. They actually control their destiny in the Big Ten West. This is the team right now who looks to be the team that's going to come out of the West Division there. They've played really good football, but Notre Dame's been on a roll. They won a big game last week against Navy. They won a big game the week before against Pitt. And obviously they've won all their games to this point, but the reason I said these last 2 is because this is supposed to be the easy, quote-unquote easy portion of their schedule. But these are some of the games that there is no ranking to them. The other game is not ranked. The other team is not ranked. Notre Dame is. This is going to be a tough game. They're toughest by far of the non-ranked opponents, but I'm still going to go with the Fighting Irish to win a close game against Northwestern.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, and the reason why I say that is I got to pull up something really quick about Notre Dame before I kind of explain something and give my pick. So the last road games for Notre Dame against Wake Forest started out 3-7 after one. Going into half, they kind of blew it open to 28-13, didn't officially run away until the second half. That was the Ian Book game. Then Virginia Tech, they actually went into halftime only leading by 17-16, before blowing it open in the second half. And then the Navy game, which was on the road, probably their most decisive road game, but it was also a road game for Navy as well, 27-0 at half, and then let Navy score 22 points in the second half. I am actually going upset special here, Brandon. It pains me to pick Northwestern. The blue and orange in me is boiling, Brandon. It is boiling, because it's like, how can you pick the Wildcats? We never pick the Wildcats. We hate the Wildcats. The Illini in me just wants to burn and kind of shrivel up, but I am going to pick the Wildcats to beat Notre Dame and play spoiler to their college football playoff hopes. It's at home at Northwestern. Notre Dame is susceptible on the road to an upset. I'm going to say Northwestern gets the better edge of them, and Northwestern has been playing better as of late.
Northwestern, they've done really well for me when I picked them in upsets this year. I think they're 2-0 when I picked them in upsets this season.
Well, too bad you're not picking them in this one, because I would feel a little bit more confident. But hey, you got to go ahead and pick the other one so I can gain some games on you. Then we've got, to me, I think 2 easy ones, but the first one's Clemson-Louisville. Like, Clemson's a 36-point favorite, should probably be higher. Louisville is bad this year. I'm going to go with the Tigers to get the win over the Louisville Cardinals.
Yeah, no Lamar Jackson, and they have certainly felt the effects of that. It's been really, really rough sledding for Louisville, all Clemson.
Then the next game I'll ask you about, Nebraska, they're on a 2-game win streak. They now go into Columbus to play the Buckeyes. Can they play spoiler in Columbus, or will the Buckeyes kind of smack them around a little bit?
If Nebraska plays spoiler in Columbus, Urban Meyer will not be going back with the team. He will be fired before he was even able to get on the bus or the plane or whatever form of transportation they're taking.
Oh, man.
Ohio State is not going to lose this game. Buckeyes all the way.
Yeah, this was, I said easy one because I wrote down Ohio State before I even looked at the line for this one. Then an interesting one because it's only a 5-point line for this one in the favorite of the Orange, but we've got Syracuse at 22. They are going to go into Winston-Salem to play the Wake Forest Demon Deacons. I got to go with my boy Dino Babers and going with the Syracuse Orange to get the win over the Demon Deacons.
Syracuse has been a much improved team this season. We've seen it. We saw how well they played against Clemson earlier in the year, really had a shot at winning that football game, but Clemson able to get it in the end. And Wake Forest really hasn't been that strong of a team this season. Got to go with the Syracuse Orange.
And then two back-to-back SEC games. The first one, Texas A&M against Auburn. I'm surprised because Texas A&M is the ranked team in this, but maybe because it's at home, Auburn is a 5-point favorite. Who are you taking, the Tigers or the Aggies?
Auburn has been disappointing this season, but Texas A&M also has been up and down on their games this year as well. I know that Auburn's at home, and you would think, okay, give the upper hand to them, but I'm going to say Texas A&M is going to get a bounce-back win after losing against Mississippi State last week.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat as you. I like Texas A&M in this one. I haven't liked Auburn since, week 1 when I picked them against Washington. Besides that, I have not liked the Tigers too much this year. Then a ranked matchup in the SEC. Georgia gets a big win last week, 7-1. They are now number 6. They will play 7-1 Kentucky, who avoided upset to the hands of the Mizzou Tigers. Who gets the win in Lexington, Kentucky, the Bulldogs or the Wildcats?
I'm actually going to go with Georgia in this one. I'm going to say Georgia because Kentucky has shown, and why they almost lost last week too, is they're just too one-dimensional. They have no passing game. It's been really tough, and I'm surprised that they're even ranked number 11 right now. It's because of their running game. It's because of their defense. Certainly not their passing game. Georgia will be able to feast because of that.
Yeah, I almost picked Kentucky in this one. I thought you were going to pick Kentucky because of how often you like to go in these big type games, that is. It seems like you like to go against the Bulldogs because Bulldogs and LSU, I just don't think you're very high on this year in these ranked games, but I got to go with the Bulldogs in this one. They have the better coach. They have the better quarterback. Running back might be a little bit of a sway to the Wildcats, but I got to go Bulldogs to get the win in Kentucky. Then a Big 12 matchup. Number 12 West Virginia going into Austin, Texas. And the big thing that I found funny today, I think it was First Take I heard this, after the loss to Oklahoma State, which Brandon, the curse is still alive. Thank you very much for that. But it was, I think, Stephen A. when he was like, oh, remember when 2 weeks ago, Texas is back, Texas is back. He goes, what, back to 3 losses? And they're not at 3 losses yet. They could be after this week. Who are you going with in Austin, the Mountaineers or the Longhorns?
I'm going to go with the Mountaineers. I think that West Virginia got things back on track last week against Baylor. Will Greer looked good again, throwing for over 350 yards, 3 touchdowns. He didn't turn the football over. I think Texas's defense looked really susceptible to big plays last week. And when Oklahoma State is able to do that against you, I think West Virginia certainly will be able to do that. I don't know if Sam Ehlinger is going to have enough in him. While West Virginia's defense is not necessarily anything to write home about, they have made some big plays at some big moments this season. I think West Virginia will be able to get the win this week.
Ehlinger played very well last week, even in a loss. I am going to differ with you on this one. I am going with Tejas to get the win, and the Longhorns will beat the Mountaineers, and they will be back for a second time. Stella is getting her groove back part numero dos. Then we got a Big 12 matchup. Matt will be watching this one very intently as 6-2 Iowa comes into West Lafayette, Indiana to play the Purdue Boilermakers. I am going to go with the team. I shouldn't pick them because, A, when I picked this team last week, they lost, and when I picked against Purdue, they won. But I'm picking against Purdue again. I'm going with Iowa to get the win. How about you?
Yeah, Purdue had their first loss in over a month last weekend, and it was a tough one. Iowa played Penn State really, really well. I'm going to have to go with the Hawkeyes. I think that they get a win this week on the road. That
was another one, B. I thought you were going to go with Purdue in that one. I thought you were going to stick with Matt, going with Purdue. I mean, Matt's obviously going to root for Purdue because he's a Purdue fan, but I thought I was going to get one on there, and you surprised me by picking the Hawkeyes. I won't be able to gain a game on you in that matchup, but how about the next one? We talked about this one. Michigan hosting Penn State. Who gets the dub?
It's going to be a great game. This is going to be a hard-fought matchup. It's a Big Ten game. I've got to go with Michigan. I'm going to go with the home team. I think that Michigan, they've got a lot of things riding on this one. Penn State, they've been good, then they've not been good. They've been up, they've been down. Now they're meeting a Michigan team whose defense can really hold you down no matter how good you are. I think that Trace McSorley, while he has been very good in his college career, I think he's going to have at least one turnover this weekend, and Michigan's going to be able to I think, win the game on the ground. They're going to win there. Higdon's going to have a great game. It's going to be his, I believe, sixth straight game with over 100 yards. Michigan's going to win.
Yeah, I got to go with Michigan as well. I just think that they're the better team than Penn State. I know that that's not always the case. Upsets can happen, but I got to go with Michigan to get the win at home. If this was at Penn State, I might be thinking the other way, but I'm going to go with the Wolverines. Then a game that it pains me to make this pick, Brandon, because not only are the Hokies a 2-point favorite against Boston College in Blacksburg, Virginia, not only are the Hokies my other favorite team, but Boston College I've had a soft spot for ever since the beginning of the year. And if you are a loyal listener to the podcast, you might be thinking, hey, we got to put your hand on Ricky's head. Is he feeling okay? First he picks Northwestern. Now he picks against his Virginia Tech Hokies. I am going to pick A.J. Dillon is back, returning last week, having a big game. I am going to pick the Eagles of Boston College to beat the Virginia Tech Hokies.
Yeah, I'm going to go with BC as well. A.J. Dillon with a great week last week, 32 carries, 149 yards on the ground, and a touchdown. I think that he is going to roll this week against Virginia Tech, and Boston College will win because of it.
And then SEC action, Mizzou against Florida. Brandon, should the Gators be worried? Should the Gators be worried about Missouri because of what almost happened last week to Kentucky?
Yes, they should be. I think Florida should be worried about Missouri, and I think Florida should be worried just in general because they really have a liability at quarterback with Felipe Franks. He has shown it throughout his career, throughout his couple of seasons now at Florida. He doesn't make the big plays, but he will for the other team. And that's why I think Florida this week, they should be a little worried. Missouri gets the upset.
I mean, just ask Tennessee. What was that, last year when he threw that Hail Mary and it got intercepted in the end zone and Tennessee beat Georgia in the swamp? Was that last year when that happened or 2 years ago? I can't remember. But that's what I thought of when you said he'll make the play for the other team. I'm going to pick Florida. I can't pick Missouri. Like, I don't know. It's just something in me that's like, yeah, last week was a fluke. I am going to go with the Gators to get the win over the Tigers. Then we're going to move into Pac-12 action.
And I just
go ahead.
Say really quickly,
Mm-hmm.
I really want to pick the Florida Gators there. I really do, because there's nothing really too enticing about just picking Missouri, because there's just not a whole lot about them. When you just say Missouri, it's like, oh, Missouri.
And but Brandon's like, I can't lose a game on you. That'd be throwing away a game.
But Drew Lock at quarterback, Roundtree at running back, I think that they have the offensive weapons to be able to beat Florida. Florida's defense is their biggest strength. I know that, but I don't think that Florida's offense. I think if Missouri can stop the run there, and then they'll of course be able to get to Felipe Franks. Everyone really seems to be able to. I think that's why Missouri's going to be able to win. But I really want to pick Florida, but I can't. I'm going Missouri.
Oh, you are going. Okay, you are going with. Missouri.
Oh yeah. That's why I said Missouri's going to get the upset. Missouri.
Okay. Well, I didn't hear that. I was going to ask you after we recorded to get it on our spreadsheet. Don't want one like last week where I had you down as Arizona. But you obviously said Oregon. I don't know. I guess I wasn't listening to you last week. But then we've got a 7-1 team, undefeated in the American, the Houston Cougars, going up against the 3-5 SMU Mustangs. I am going with the Cougars. How about you?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Houston. Wanted to go with them last week, but I thought, now Florida's been on a roll. They've been winning all these games. That's why they're staying, in the top 25. And then Houston just put a beating down on them. I think Houston gets a big win this week too.
Now, here's a question for you. Of course, UCF has to get through Temple this week, but I'm going to ask you this anyways. If Houston and UCF play in the American title game, do you think there's a chance? I'm not saying to give me a for sure victor, but do you think there's a chance that Houston can be the team to knock off the Knights? Could they be the one?
There could be. There was a chance earlier this year when UCF should have lost, and they did. And they were able to come back. But there's certainly a chance. You can always say that there's a chance because there always is. I mean, that's what sports is all about, always a chance. Doesn't always mean that's going to happen, but always a chance.
And Brandon, we'll move on Pac-12. We're doing these a little out of order because I just noticed that when you went back to Mizzou, I completely skipped a game here, but we got not one Utes, but two Utes. The Utah Utes taking on Arizona State in Tempe, Arizona. Also, big news for ASU fans. They got their first commitment from the class of 2020 as Chad Johnson Jr. will now commit to be a Arizona State Sun Devil. But who are you picking in this one, 2018, Utah or ASU?
So that would be Chad Ochocinco Jr., right?
Yeah, I believe so.
I'm gonna go with Utah. Utah has shown to be a strong team this year in the Pac-12, and Arizona State, while they have kind of repeatedly shown that they can have that upset potential, I think Utah is the better team in this matchup. And
then we've got two SEC matchups. Well, one's a non-conference one. This one to me is easy. Louisiana Tech going up against Mississippi State, and I am going to go with the Bulldogs to get the win here. Mississippi State with the dub.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Mississippi State as well. They had a nice win last week against Texas A&M. I'm going to say that they rolled this one.
And then the game that we spoke about earlier, it is Alabama at number 1. It is LSU at number 4. Brandon, who gets the win, Alabama or LSU?
LSU was able to knock off the top Florida team back in the 1990s and 1997, and LSU was the home 16.5-point underdog. They will not do that this weekend, being the 14.5-point underdog at home against Alabama. Alabama is going to get this win. There's just too many people to stop right now for Alabama. LSU is not going to be able to do it.
And I am going to have to agree with you, only because there's a part of me that wanted to pick LSU because I knew you were going to pick Alabama. However, it's the Alabama rule. Until Alabama loses, like every year, you just pick Alabama until they lose. I am doing that still. I am picking Alabama. The risk reward for, yes, if I pick LSU and I'm right, I gain a game on you in the record. But if I don't and they lose, then it is better to have lost with you than to have lost against you. So I am going to go with Alabama to beat LSU in this game. Then we've got some Big 12 action going on. Oklahoma against Texas Tech. Do the Red Raiders have a chance to beat the Sooners in Lubbock, Texas?
Again, Ricky, you ask if there's that chance always, but not a good one. Oklahoma's going to get the win.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the Sooners as well. almost wanted to pick the upset, but I'm not going to. I'm going to pick the favorite with the Sooners. Then we have 3 ranked games left. The first one, Fresno State in the Mountain West playing 2-6 UNLV. Got to go with the 25-point favorite, Fresno State Bulldogs.
Yeah, UNLV has been very consistent lately. Just in their last 5
losses.
Definitely can't go with UNLV. So got to go Fresno State.
And then a team that we talked about earlier in the first segment of the podcast, the Washington State Cougars. They're going to host the Cal Bears, who just recently beat the Washington Huskies. Does Cal have it in them again to upset a Washington-based team?
Oh, Washington State, I think for sure is going to get the win in this one. They've been playing really good football. They've won their last 4. They've been feeling themselves. That's for sure. They're looking like a team that could have playoff hopes at the end of the season.
Yeah, I should have picked Washington State last week. I am going to pick them this week. They will get the win over Cal. And then our last ranked matchup, we have 7-1 Utah State going up against 6-4 Hawaii in Honolulu. Who you got, Utah State or the Warriors?
I picked Utah State earlier this year. They were not a top 25 team at the time out of the Mountain West, and I'm going to roll with them again.
Yeah, I'm going to go Utah State in this one as well. Just don't think Hawaii has it in them, although it is a home game for the Warriors. I am going to go with I believe the Rainbow Warriors. Am I saying that full name right? I think it's, the Rainbow Warriors, not just the Warriors. But I think the Aggies from Utah State are going to go ahead and get the win. And then our non-top 25 game, Brandon, I am going to let you go first. Who is your top 25 game and the winner?
Well, this team has been struggling this year, and they've been struggling as of late. But I am going to say that the USC Trojans are going to get back on track this year, and they're going to beat Oregon State on the road at Reser Stadium.
The Oregon State team that recently beat Colorado this past weekend.
Yes.
So my game, I'm dipping into some waters that we have now. This is a first on the Primetime Podcast. This first part isn't a first. It is a undefeated versus undefeated matchup going on in the state of New Jersey. This game will only be available to you on ESPN+. It is a 12 p.m. kickoff on Saturday. But here are the firsts, Brandon. At first, this is the first FCS game that we will be picking on the podcast. Well, that I will be picking. And number 2, it is the first Ivy League game that we will have featured on the podcast. We have on 2 sides. 1, Dartmouth. On the other side, Princeton. 7-0 versus 7-0. The winner, the king of the Ivy League. They're already the king because they're smarter than I'll ever be, but at football, they at least get to win the Ivy League if they win this game. I'm going to go with Princeton to get the win at home over Dartmouth, and Princeton then will be in the driver's seat to win the Ivy League crown at the end of the year. So, Brandon, an FCS for the first time and an Ivy League matchup for the first time on the podcast.
Ricky, very interesting. I like you going outside the box on that.
Yeah, I looked at it. I'm like, what FCS teams are going at it? And I'm like, ooh, undefeated versus undefeated. I feel like I have to go with this one and Princeton, even though I really don't know nothing about Ivy League football, and could have easily picked Dartmouth as well. But this is going to be it for the Primetime Podcast this week. Thank you guys for coming with us and chilling with us as we talk some college football. Make sure to let us know who you are picking down below. Let us know what you think about anything we talked about on the podcast. Quick little housekeeping here at the end. Make sure to support us on patreon.com/MostValuedPodcast. That link is down below in the description. You can also get our t-shirt down there as well. You can also get it at MostValuedPodcast.com, where you can catch MVP each and every day. And then last but not least, please go on to Apple Podcasts and iTunes. Rate the podcast. Let us know why you like listening to the podcast each and every week. I want to thank you guys for listening to the podcast this week. Have a great week of football, and as always, Have a good day, everybody.